19 years with the company, and it ends with your CEO calling you outdated in front of the entire board. But here's the thing about being outdated. Sometimes the old machinery is what keeps the whole operation running. I'm Walt Hoffman, and until about 6 months ago, I was the Chief Financial Officer at Apex Technologies here in Dallas. Built that company's financial foundation from the ground up. Guided them through 2 recessions, 3 major acquisitions, and more market crashes than I care to count. But none of that mattered when Cameron Hughes decided I was standing in the way of his $3.7 billion empire. That morning started like any other Tuesday. Linda was making coffee when I came downstairs, already dressed for what I thought would be a routine quarterly board review. She looked up from her mug and smiled. "You know what today marks?" she asked. I grabbed my travel mug and kissed her forehead. "Tuesday? 19 years, Walt. 19 years since you walked into that building as their new CFO. I paused at the door. 19 years. Sometimes it felt like yesterday, sometimes like a lifetime. Linda had been through it all with me, the late nights during the 2008 crisis, the stress when I missed James's high school graduation because of the Techland acquisition, the cancer scare 2 years ago when I almost quit to take care of her. 19 good years, I said. If I'd known what was coming, I might have stayed home. The meeting room on the 28th floor looked the same as always. Glass walls, polished oak table, leather chairs that cost more than most people make in a month. The kind of corporate theater where big decisions get dressed up as team discussions. I walked in with my usual stack of financial reports, risk assessments, and compliance checklists. 19 years of doing this job had taught me to always come prepared. Cameron was already there, holding court with a few board members. His tie was loosened, sleeves rolled up, his man-of-the-people look that he'd perfected since taking over from his father 5 years ago. Back then, he was just 33, fresh from Harvard MBA, eager to learn the business. I'd spent months teaching him how our systems worked, explaining why we built our financial controls the way we did. The agenda was supposed to be routine. Q3 numbers, budget projections for next year, maybe some discussion about the Summit Corp acquisition that had been floating around for months. Standard corporate business. What I got was an ambush. Before we dive into the quarterly reports, Cameron announced once everyone was seated, "I think we need to address the elephant in the room." His eyes found mine across that polished table. Walt's become a bottleneck. His outdated approach to risk management is killing our growth potential. You know that feeling when the air gets sucked out of a room? That's what happened. 8 board members suddenly found their coffee cups very interesting. Patricia Mills shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Charles Webb, from our biggest institutional investor, kept his eyes down. "The Summit deal should have closed 6 months ago," Cameron continued, warming up to his theme. "But Walt here keeps finding new reasons to delay. More studies, more reports, more analysis paralysis." He leaned forward, his voice getting sharper. "Walt's lost his edge, playing it too safe, blocking progress. Maybe it's time for fresh blood to handle the big deals." I sat there, pen in hand, watching my career get dissected in real time. 19 years of keeping this company profitable, and I'm getting lectured about being too cautious. The same caution that saved us millions during the dot-com crash. The same analysis that kept us out of the subprime mortgage disaster that killed half our competitors. "Cameron," I said, keeping my voice level, "the Summit acquisition has legitimate due diligence issues that—" "That's exactly what I'm talking about," he cut me off. "Everything's an issue with you. Every opportunity becomes a problem to solve." He gestured to the board members like they were jury members. "We need leaders who see solutions, not obstacles." The room was dead quiet. Patricia Mills was staring at her notepad like it contained the secrets of the universe. Charles Webb was checking his phone. Nobody was making eye contact with me. Then Cameron delivered the knockout punch. "I've made my decision. Walt Hoffman is no longer Chief Financial Officer of Apex Technologies, effective immediately." The words hit me like a physical blow. 19 years. And it ends with a sentence that took 5 seconds to deliver. I looked around that table one more time. These people had trusted me with their company's financial future for nearly 2 decades. I'd made them rich, kept them out of trouble, built the systems that turned Cameron's father's startup dreams into a Fortune 200 reality. And not one of them said a word in my defense. So I did what you do in situations like this. I gathered my papers, stood up, and walked toward the door. Professional to the end. "Walt," Cameron called after me, his voice softer now, probably realizing how brutal he'd just been. "This isn't personal, it's just business." I paused at the door and looked back at him. "Cameron, everything about business is personal. You just never learned that." Walking out felt like leaving my own funeral. The hallway stretched endlessly. I could feel eyes watching through office windows, people already starting to whisper. But here's what nobody in that room knew, including Cameron. As I walked past their shocked faces, past the corporate artwork and motivational posters about teamwork and excellence, I was carrying knowledge that would bring his entire empire crashing down. And the beautiful part? He'd handed me the weapon himself 2 years earlier. Let me back up and tell you how this really started. Because the best revenge stories always begin with the target digging his own grave. 2 years ago, Cameron came to me with the Summit Corp deal. He was practically vibrating with excitement, talking about market domination, crushing the competition, making Apex the undisputed leader in our sector. Classic Cameron, big vision, bigger ego, zero patience for details. The numbers looked solid on paper, I'll give him that. Summit was a tech company with good revenue streams and decent growth projections. But I've been in finance long enough to know that paper doesn't tell the whole story. During my initial review, I found some concerning liability issues. Nothing deal-breaking, but enough to raise red flags. Environmental compliance problems at their manufacturing facilities. Some questionable accounting practices in their international divisions. A few lawsuits that hadn't been properly disclosed. Standard due diligence stuff, really. The kind of issues that experienced CFOs catch before they become expensive problems. "We don't have time for deep investigations," Cameron snapped when I brought up my concerns. "Our competitors are circling. If we don't move fast, someone else will snap them up." This was classic Cameron Hughes. Rush first, worry about consequences later. I'd watched him operate this way for years, ever since he took over from his father who founded the company. And it usually worked out because I was there in the background, catching the falling pieces, cleaning up the messes, making his aggressive strategies actually work. But this time felt different. The stakes were bigger, the risks more complex, and Cameron was more impatient than I'd ever seen him. So I did what any good CFO would do. I built myself an insurance policy. Here's the thing about Apex Technologies. It wasn't your typical public corporation. When Cameron's father started the company, he set up the bylaws with some unusual provisions. As a privately held company that later went public, we kept certain founder protections in place. One of those was a special fiduciary officer designation that couldn't be easily revoked without cause and board supermajority. I'd held that designation for 15 years. It was buried so deep in corporate paperwork that most people forgot it existed. The clause I added was simple, tucked into Section 14, subsection C, page 47 of a 200-page document. Easy to miss if you're the type of executive who signs things without reading them, which, let's be honest, Cameron absolutely was. The clause read, "Final authorization for any acquisition exceeding $1 billion requires countersignature from the designated fiduciary officer, ensuring regulatory compliance and shareholder protection." Sounds boring, right? Corporate legal speak that most people would skim right over. But those 23 words were about to become the most important sentence Cameron Hughes ever ignored. The night I drafted that clause, we were in the conference room until almost midnight. Empty coffee cups everywhere, legal documents scattered across the table like confetti. Most of the executives had already gone home, but Cameron was still there pacing behind my chair, his patience wearing thinner by the hour. "We don't need more delays, Walt," he kept saying. "Our competitors are circling. We need this framework signed before morning." I kept my eyes on my laptop screen, typing and retyping the language until it was exactly right. 19 years in corporate finance had taught me that the devil lives in the details. And sometimes, if you're smart about it, you can make the devil work for you. When I finally slid the draft across the table, Cameron barely glanced at it. He was already mentally celebrating his victory, probably thinking about the press conference he'd hold to announce the deal. "This looks fine," he muttered, flipping through pages faster than anyone could actually read them. "Print it." I watched Cameron's face as he signed that document. No hesitation, no questions. He thought I was just another rubber stamp in his corporate machine. But I knew something he didn't. Someday, maybe someday soon, this clause would matter. Fast forward 2 years. The Summit deal was back on the table, bigger and more aggressive than ever. Market conditions were perfect. Cameron's ego was at an all-time high, and he'd spent the last 6 months telling investors this merger would make Apex the dominant player in our sector. The stock price had already jumped 12% just on rumors of the acquisition. Financial journalists were calling it the deal of the decade. Everything was going exactly according to his master plan. There was just one tiny problem. The guy whose signature he needed to close the deal was the same guy he'd just fired for being outdated. Walking back to my office after that boardroom execution felt like walking through a different company. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Conversations stopped when I appeared. People suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. I wasn't their respected CFO anymore. I was marked. My assistant wasn't at her desk, probably called into HR for transition planning or whatever they call it, when they're erasing you from the organizational chart. The door to my office was still open, but it felt like entering a crime scene. Lisa Martinez from HR was waiting by my desk. She had that carefully neutral expression HR people perfect over years of delivering bad news to people who used to matter. "You'll need to clear your things today," she said, gesturing to a cardboard box sitting on my chair. "I'll supervise the packing process." Supervise. Like I might steal the staplers or download secret files. 19 years of building this company's financial systems, and now I needed supervision to pack my family photos. I nodded and started gathering my professional life into that box. My MBA diploma from UT, a photo from the company's IPO celebration 12 years ago, my CPA certification, a coffee mug from a risk management conference that nobody remembers. As I cleaned out my desk drawers, my fingers hit something thick wedged against the back panel. I pulled it out, a glossy binder with merger, agreement draft, Apex Summit. Acquisition printed across the cover. My heart started beating faster. I flipped through the familiar sections until I found page 47, section 14, subsection C. And there it was, the line that would change everything. Countersignature required from designated fiduciary officer Walt Hoffman. The space next to my name was completely blank. Lisa was busy checking her phone, probably coordinating with security about when to escort me out. She wasn't paying attention to what I was packing. I slipped the binder back under some old quarterly reports and closed the drawer. For the first time since Cameron's public execution, I smiled. You know what they say about the best laid plans? Sometimes they work exactly the way you designed them to, even when you're not trying to use them. Sometimes the safety net you built years ago becomes the rope your enemy hangs himself with. The drive home gave me time to think. 19 years with one company is a long time in today's economy. Most of my peers had job-hopped their way up the corporate ladder, chasing bigger titles and better stock options. But I'd stayed loyal to Apex, believed in building something lasting, trusted that dedication would be rewarded. My dad used to tell me, "Son, a man's word is his bond. You keep your promises, even when nobody's watching." I'd kept my promise to Apex for 19 years, protected their money, built their systems, cleaned up their messes. And my reward? Getting called outdated by a CEO whose biggest qualification was inheriting his father's company. Linda was in the kitchen when I walked in at 3:30 p.m. She looked up from her laptop. She'd been working from home since her treatment ended, and I could see the question in her eyes. "How'd the anniversary celebration go?" she asked. I set my cardboard box on the counter and sat down heavily. They fired me. The words hung in the air. Linda closed her laptop slowly. What happened? I told her everything. The ambush, Cameron's speech about fresh blood, the security escort. She listened without interrupting, her hand finding mine across the table. 19 years, she said finally. 19 years. What are we going to do about James's tuition? The mortgage? I looked at her, my wife who'd fought cancer and won, who'd supported every late night and missed dinner for this company, and felt something harden in my chest. Not anger exactly, resolution. "We'll be fine," I said. "Trust me." That night, I sat in my kitchen and opened the binder. Every page was exactly as I remembered it. Every clause was still legally binding. And that blank line next to my name, still blank. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 7:30 a.m. I was still in my bathrobe, making coffee and trying to adjust to the strange reality of having nowhere to be. 19 years of corporate routine, and suddenly I'm unemployed on a Wednesday. The first call was from Patterson Wright and Associates, the law firm handling the Apex Summit merger, The Voice. On the other end was polite but urgent. Mr. Hoffman, this is Jennifer Walsh from Patterson Wright. We need to schedule a meeting to complete the final authorization paperwork. The regulatory deadline is Friday. I let it go to voicemail. By 9:00 a.m., 3 more calls. By lunch, 7. Each one a little more desperate than the last. Walt, this is Tom Patterson himself. We understand there have been some organizational changes, but the legal framework still requires your signature. Please call me back immediately. The beautiful thing about being fired is that suddenly you have all the time in the world to think clearly. No meetings, no deadlines, no Cameron Hughes breathing down your neck about quarterly projections. Just you, your coffee, and the slow realization that maybe losing your job isn't the worst thing that could happen. Around 2:00 p.m., my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. International area code. Mr. Hoffman, this is Charles Webb from Northridge Capital. I sat up straighter. Northridge managed over $350 billion in pension funds and institutional investments. When they called, smart people answered. Mr. Webb, what can I do for you? I'll be direct, Walt. Our analysts have been reviewing the Summit acquisition structure. We understand you hold the required countersignature for final approval. We have a $2.8 billion position in Apex. That got my attention. $2.8 billion wasn't pocket change, even for Northridge. Given recent developments at Apex, we wanted to understand your current position on this transaction. What's your analysis of the deal, Mr. Webb? Our due diligence team has identified several risk factors that concern us. Environmental liabilities at Summit's manufacturing sites, some irregular accounting practices in their overseas operations, a few regulatory issues that haven't been fully disclosed. The same issues I'd flagged 2 years ago. The same concerns Cameron had dismissed as analysis paralysis. Those issues are still unresolved, I said. We suspected as much. Walt, I'll be frank with you. If this merger proceeds without proper due diligence, Northridge will likely exit our position in Apex entirely. After Webb hung up, I sat thinking about irony. Cameron had fired me for being too cautious about a deal that his biggest investor was now questioning. The same caution he called outdated was exactly what smart money appreciated. Thursday brought more calls, more emails, more desperate attempts to locate the missing CFO signature, but it also brought something else, news coverage. Apex Technologies faces unexpected delay in major acquisition. The financial press had picked up the story, not the full story. They didn't know about the firing yet, but enough to start asking questions. The stock price wobbled down 3%. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of uncertainty that makes institutional investors nervous. That evening, James called from business school. Dad, I'm seeing some weird news about Apex. Everything okay? I looked out my kitchen window at the Dallas skyline. Somewhere in one of those glass towers, Cameron was probably pacing his office, demanding updates from lawyers who had no updates to give. Everything's fine, son. Just some corporate politics. You sure? Because if you need help with tuition money... James, I said, your old man's been doing this for 19 years. Trust me. Friday morning, deadline day. My phone rang at 6:00 a.m. Cameron Hughes himself, his voice tight with controlled panic. Walt, we need to talk. This delay is creating unnecessary uncertainty in the market. I let him talk for 2 minutes about professional obligations and fiduciary duty to shareholders before I finally responded. Cameron, I think you fired me for being too cautious about this exact deal. Look, maybe I was hasty Tuesday. The board was pressuring me to move faster, and I took that frustration out on you. That wasn't fair. Hasty. 19 years of building his company's financial foundation, and my termination was hasty. What exactly are you asking me to do, Cameron? Sign the authorization, complete the merger, then we can discuss your future with the company. My future? I thought I was outdated. I'll consider it, I said, and hung up. But I'd already made my decision. Not out of anger or revenge, though I'd be lying if I said those feelings weren't there. I made it because 19 years of experience had taught me something simple. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them. Cameron had shown me that loyalty meant nothing to him. That experience was a liability, not an asset. That the person who'd built his company's financial systems could be discarded the moment they became inconvenient. So I did what any good CFO would do. I protected the shareholders from bad decision-making. Friday brought reporters to my front door. The story had leaked completely now. Fired CFO holding up billion-dollar merger. The press loved it. Corporate drama with clear heroes and villains. Mr. Hoffman, can you comment on why you're refusing to sign the merger authorization? I gave them the same answer I'd given everyone else. Due diligence isn't negotiable. Never was, never will be. By noon, the story hit the major financial networks. Apex CEO fires CFO, then needs his signature for merger. Stock price down 8%. Board members calling emergency meetings. Institutional investors making threatening phone calls. I watched Cameron's damage control press conference from my living room. He looked terrible, pale, sweating, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. This is a temporary procedural issue, he insisted to the cameras. We're confident it will be resolved shortly. But his voice cracked when he said it. The market doesn't believe executives who crack under pressure. Around 3:00 p.m., a knock on my door. Patricia Mills stood there, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Walt, can we talk? I invited her in, poured coffee, and waited to see what Apex's board of directors wanted to say now that their billion-dollar deal was falling apart. The board met in emergency session this morning, Patricia said, stirring sugar into her cup with nervous precision. We've reviewed the legal framework of the Summit acquisition. We understand your position. What position is that? You're the only person who can complete this merger, and Cameron fired you. I nodded. That's an accurate summary. Patricia looked out my kitchen window at the Dallas skyline, probably thinking about all those glass towers where Apex's competitors were watching the company implode in real time. The board is prepared to offer you immediate reinstatement, full CFO authority, 5-year contract, 20% salary increase, and Cameron would report quarterly progress to you on all major deals. Interesting. They were essentially neutering their own CEO. Patricia, let me ask you something. If I sign this authorization today, what happens to me next month when Cameron decides I'm still too cautious about his next big idea? She didn't have an answer for that because we both knew exactly what would happen. 6 months from now, maybe a year, Cameron would find another reason to call me outdated, and I'd be right back where I started. The board would protect you, she said, but even she didn't sound convinced. Like you protected me Tuesday? After Patricia left, I sat at my kitchen table looking at the binder one more time. In 2 hours, the regulatory deadline would pass. The biggest deal in Apex's history would collapse. Hundreds of jobs might be affected. The stock would crater. I thought about all the employees who'd trusted me over the years, the junior analysts I'd mentored, the accounting staff who'd worked weekends during earnings season. They didn't deserve to suffer because their CEO was an arrogant fool. But sometimes doing the right thing hurts good people. That's what my dad never told me about keeping your word. At 4:30 p.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Cameron Hughes standing on my porch, no entourage, no security detail. Just a desperate man in a wrinkled suit. Walt, please, can I come in? I stepped aside and let him into my kitchen. He sat down across from me at the same table where Patricia had made her offer 2 hours earlier. I know I screwed up, he said. I know I was wrong to fire you. My father always said you were the best CFO he'd ever worked with. He told me when I took over, listen to Walt Hoffman. He'll keep you out of trouble. Then why didn't you? Cameron ran his hands through his hair. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked his age, vulnerable, scared. Because I wanted to prove I didn't need anyone, that I could build something bigger than what my father built, that I wasn't just some rich kid who inherited a company. He looked up at me. I fired you because you made me feel small. I sat back in my chair. In all the scenarios I'd imagined, I never thought Cameron would actually tell the truth. The Summit deal, I said, it's not ready. You know that, right? They say environmental issues alone could cost us $200 million in cleanup. I know. Our lawyers confirmed everything you flagged 2 years ago, But if we don't close something big soon, the board's going to replace me. I'm already on thin ice after this week. I looked at the clock. 4:47 p.m. Cameron, sometimes the best deal is the one you don't make. He stared at me across the table, understanding finally dawning on his face. You're really not going to sign it. Due diligence isn't negotiable. Never was, never will be. At 5:00 p.m. Exactly, I was sitting on my couch watching the financial news when the alert started flashing across the screen. Breaking, Apex Summit merger collapses. Stock drops 15% in after-hours trading. CEO Cameron Hughes unable to secure required authorization. Financial analysts were calling it one of the most spectacular corporate failures of the year. My phone rang immediately. Mr. Hoffman, I assume you've seen the news. It was Elena Porter from Sterling Associates, a corporate restructuring firm I'd heard of but never dealt with. Our consortium specializes in acquiring undervalued assets from companies experiencing leadership difficulties. We'd like to discuss a position with you. What kind of position? Chief Financial Officer. We're planning to acquire Apex's core technology assets when they restructure. We need someone who understands the real value of what they built, someone who can spot the risks that others miss. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a new office. Same title, better company. Sterling had bought Apex's best divisions for 40 cents on the dollar. We kept 800 jobs and eliminated the environmental liability by leaving Summit's problems with Summit. Cameron resigned quietly. Last I heard, he was working at a consulting firm in Austin, trying to rebuild a reputation that might never fully recover. The weird part? A month after everything settled, he sent me a handwritten note. Thank you for saving me from myself. Dad would have been proud of you. I kept the note. Linda recovered completely. James finished business school and got a job with a solid firm in Houston. Turns out having a father known for integrity opens doors. We're talking about him maybe joining Sterling in a few years, after he learns the business somewhere else first. I never planned to destroy anyone's empire. I just refused to put my name on something that didn't make sense. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person willing to say no when everyone else is saying yes. My dad was right. A man's word is his bond. Sometimes the most important word you can give is no.